There's no doubt that looking ahead, ASIC is going to be the regulator to watch. They've announced that they intend to be a strategic and forceful regulator in the market, and they're even taking a why not litigate approach, which is a really tough enforcement stance that I think we can expect to see a lot of activity around. I think we're going to see boards and directors really scrutinised for their conduct, and particularly given that they have a major boost in funding of over $70 million, plus increased financial penalties for financial and corporate misconduct. So they're really going to have the teeth, subject to the government letting them litigate even where there's a chance they might not win.
Well, I was going to ask you that question because we've got a new head of enforcement. He's coming in from a very different background. He's not a professional regulator. He's from the private bar. He's got a criminal background. He's got a bit of swagger about him, and he's talking a big game. From my perspective, it'll be very interesting because that's a different attitude for ASIC. ASIC have been notoriously conservative because they just haven't had the resources to lose cases. So from here, I think it'll be a very interesting change of outlook for ASIC. What's going on with other regulators?
Well, there's a number of other sectors that I think are coming into the spotlight. We've had a couple of commissions announced and ongoing into the aged care and the disability sectors.
Yep, true.
And then the APRA report, of course, is about to change things up in that sector as well.
So the APRA report has just been handed down. We haven't really had a chance to digest it. Interestingly enough, it was headed by Graham Samuel, the former head of ACCC and a notoriously strong performer. The highlights that we are aware of thus far is that it's been quite damning. So both the government and APRA have accepted all the recommendations, but the recommendations are very deep and they will take a long time to follow through. They're asking for a fundamental change in culture. APRA has been singled out for being guilty of regulatory capture, such that they're seen as being too close to those they regulate and too shy to bring their regulating style out into the open. So part of the Samuel recommendations is that there be very strong changes in that outlook, as well as a bolder attempt to look after its stakeholders. One of the things they have raised is for APRA to get closer to the superannuation industry, and in particular, not be so attached to the prudential controls, of which they've done a very good job, but now move to look to the interests of the superannuation members. And superannuation is one of the biggest economic forces in the country. So that will be a big change. Anything else happening?
Look, I think the one mistake that businesses can make is they can kind of say, I'm not in the banking and finance industry, it doesn't apply to me, I'm not regulated by APRA. And I think the culture is shifting. Businesses and boards and directors are really having to hold their organisations much higher standards. And when you think about the amazing increases that we've seen under recent legislation changes to the Corporations Act, there's huge penalties now for breaches of those director duties. For individuals, a director who's convicted of an offence can face up to 15 years jail time, and the penalties increase from $200,000 to a maximum fine of the greater of $1.05 million, or 3 times the benefit derived or the detriment avoided. And for corporations, it's even greater still. So you're talking $10.5 million in penalties, or 3 times the benefit derived, or 10% of the annual turnover, and that's capped at $525 million. So I actually think we're going to see some of those cases with those big numbers attached, where previously I think communities and stakeholders have said there's not enough holding of those organisations to account for those real dishonest and reckless behaviours. For a board perspective though, as a director myself, I think, gosh, who would want to be a director in this environment? And I still think that there has to be some sort of balance struck, because you really only want to be prosecuting those people who have been dishonest and reckless and have been doing the wrong thing. You don't want boards, for example, suddenly having ridiculous amounts of board papers and board minutes becoming so detailed because everyone's under this increased compliance regime. And I don't think that was the intention of the Hayne report into the Banking Commission. That certainly isn't what I think the AICD want to see. You know, it's about talking about company culture and looking at that whole question of not can we, but should we? And as advisors and boards and directors sort of think about those concepts and the environment that we're coming into, I think it's important to be the voices that internally hold our organisations to a higher standard.
So let's talk about Hayne for a minute, because I think it's important. I was very sceptical of the Banking Royal Commission. I thought it was set up to fail, and I was wrong. I think Hayne did a spectacular job, and I think the staff employed did a wonderful job. But what was displayed was, unfortunately, a culture spread across the financial sector which was revealing. Things are changing. Just picking up on one theme from Hayne. Hayne was very big on comments on governance. He thought that there was atrophication within some of the big corporates in that they were governed to death, but the quality data was never actually getting to the decision makers. So hopefully there's going to be a change in governance styles. Time will tell on that one, but something has to change. I mean, if you were going to sit on the board of AMP, you just cannot digest hundreds of pages on a monthly basis and make an informed choice. There's just too much stuff, but is it the right stuff? So governance is going to change. I just want to touch on some of the other regulators that are also not so prominent, but they're very important. So we have the insurance sector, which is now under scrutiny. I'm aware that Treasury's got a task force which is looking into the insurance sector. Franchising is prominent.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah, it's not going to be lost. And that may appear in the unfair contracts regime as well. And generally, I think all regulators at a Commonwealth level are on notice. And the interesting thing there is that there's two pressures going on. One is public expectations, which are real. And I think the Hayne Royal Commission and the public support for it showed that. But equally, I think there is at government an understanding that the world had to change. So from my perspective, I think if I was a stakeholder, if I was a director or a manager, I would have to say the world has changed and it's time to understand who your regulator is and what their priorities are.
I think that's going to have some practical flow-down effects for businesses as well. I think everyone's going to be really looking at how they contract with other parties, the sort of fair and reasonable standards that they put into their contracts. You're going to see a lot less of the one-sided contract where you enter into a bargain with a big corporate and they just go take it or leave it because we're the big guy and you're the little guy. I think there's going to be corporations who, of their own volition and because of the tone that gets set at the board level, they're going to want to be implementing those practices right down through their general counsel, through their CEOs and directors, so that when they're engaging with other suppliers and stakeholders and customers, they're really seeing their values flow through into the way they use the law in conducting their business.
It'll be interesting. I think the ACCC has been almost a lone soldier in this one for a number of years, and they've fought the very good fight. They've been very open in how they regulate their patch. They have intruded in sectors which they previously hadn't. So they've marched into the financial sector in the last 12 months anyway, and intruded into some IPOs and alike, and made their views known, and that is having an impact. I think they're leading the way. I think they are also both a symptom and a cause of a change of public expectations. I think the world's changed.